I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to a video conference edition of the New York Times Close Up. The coronavirus has massively upended life in America. Tens of millions staying home, millions have lost their jobs, the economy at a standstill. The virus has also upended the 2020 elections. Primaries delayed, no campaigning, no rallies, Democratic candidates grounded. Bernie Sanders just about disappeared. Joe Biden doing some interviews from his home, but it's nearly impossible for him to break through all the coronavirus coverage. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is hosting a daily show at the White House. Millions are watching. And despite his denials, delays in taking action on the virus, misinformation, and mixed messages, Trump's poll numbers are rising. So what's the political state of play? Reed Epstein, a political reporter for the New York Times, Jonathan Ellis, a senior politics editor at the Times, and Johanna Barr, also a senior politics editor. We keep saying that it looks like the virus will determine whether Trump will be a one-term president. Of course, we're still 7 months out from the election. We've got Passover coming up this month. That's a reminder there still may be a lot more plagues to come. So what does the virus tell us about what the politics are going to be? Reed, what can you say?
Well, everything is frozen at this point. We learned on Thursday that the Democratic convention is going to be moved a month back into mid-August. But like you said, Vice President Biden has been essentially stuck in his home, unable to campaign, ceding not just sort of the megaphone, but almost all of the attention to President Trump and to governors like Andrew Cuomo in New York, who are now constant presences on cable television, both nationally and in their states. It hasn't left much for Mr. Biden to do. And as long as Bernie Sanders is in the race and there aren't primary contests in which for Biden to rack up delegates, he can't become the formal nominee. And so he's in this sort of holding pattern until circumstances change.
Well, does anything happen then between now and August? The primaries are going to go on. Presumably, they're going to be delayed. But does there appear to be anything on the horizon that shifts the equilibrium that we're at now?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things that are going to happen at some point in the Democratic primary. One is a lot of these primaries were moved back to June. And so at some point, all these states will vote. Wisconsin is voting on Tuesday. And that's going to be the last major primary that we have for a while. The other thing on the horizon is, the other two things on the horizon are Bernie Sanders at some point we expect will get out of the race, and Biden will pick a running mate. But the timing for both of those events is very much up in the air. Sanders has indicated that he has no plans to get out before all these other states have voted. And we frankly don't know what Biden's thinking is about when he'll choose a running mate. There's certainly schools of thought that if he does so early, he can help sort of galvanize some of the support from people who didn't vote for him in the primaries. But Biden is very much a traditionalist in a lot of these things. And the tradition says you wait until later in the summer when you can do a full vetting of a number of people.
Joanna and Jonathan, the economy obviously contracting, people are dying, yet the president's approval ratings seem to be holding steady. Why is that?
This is a very polarized country, but there is a small percentage of people who are sort of in the middle, independents, maybe some, moderate Democrats who are looking at, Trump during this crisis. And typically when something like this happens, the leader of the country does experience a bump. And so there have been, some shifts in his approval ratings in the past, week, in the past 2 weeks. But it is worth saying that, in other countries where this is happening, the leaders have experienced like larger surges in support than Trump is experiencing. So it's not clear right now if this is going to be lasting. It's not clear, what the effect is going to be as more information comes out about what the administration did or didn't do about the crisis, as frankly, more people continue to die or get sick. But right now he is enjoying a bit of a boost, and it's really too early to say what the lasting effect will be, I think.
Jonathan?
Yeah, it's interesting that this little boost that Trump is getting in the approval ratings seems to be coming from Democrats and independent voters. But I think that's largely because Trump is basically maxed out on Republicans. He can't get that much more Republican support anyway. So there are, a few voters out there who indeed are sort of having this rally behind the flag moment, and who may not have been paying as much attention in the earlier phases of this crisis. And of course, the criticism has been that the Trump administration really lagged in getting prepared for all of this. But that may not be on the top of mind for voters who are now seeing the president, taking a more active role, at least in terms of showing up on TV and certainly making it look like he's taking a very much more active role.
Again, of course, it's a long time between now and the election. And as we said, there is the old saying about changing horses in midstream. But Reed, unemployment claims are at a record, nearly 10 million in the past 2 weeks. The stock market going up and down, but basically down in record amounts. Why would the president's approval rating be holding steady or going up? Among whom in the country, do you think?
Well, there was a story by our colleagues Lisa Lair and Trip Gabriel this week where they spoke with a lot of sort of not necessarily independent, but voters who are kind of Trump curious, people who are Democrats and Republicans. And what they heard was that, folks who are not sort of political animals, who have, relatively limited access to news, they see Trump as a leader in this. And there is, like you said, there's a rally behind the leader sense of it. There was a poll out of Wisconsin this week by Marquette University, which is the most respected poller in the state, that found 51% of Wisconsinites approve of Trump's handling of the coronavirus, but at the same time gave Joe Biden a 3-point lead in a head-to-head matchup with the president. So there's some bifurcation in how people think about this, in that there are clearly people who both think that Trump is doing a good job handling the coronavirus and don't want him to be president anymore.
It's interesting. We've had a number of stories in the Times the past week or so talking about the fact that conservatives and liberals seem to be looking at this crisis in different ways. That partisanship, one conclusion, is a more consistent predictor of behavior, attitudes, and preference than just about anything else we measure. Republicans not as worried about the virus, but supporting restricting trade and movement. Liberals more interested in helping people. And then you see things like Hobby Lobby reopening its stores, Liberty University opening, Devin Nunes saying canceling school was an overkill. Do we see any reason why this is playing out? Is this a philosophical difference, or is it pure partisanship, or what? Joanna and Jonathan, what do you think?
There's a lot of distrust of government institutions. There's distrust of science. We've done numerous stories about how the conservative media has downplayed the threat. And quite frankly, I think it takes knowing people around you are affected for some people to really recognize the scale of what's going on here. So, I'm sitting in New York City, and obviously it's right in front of me and I can see what's happening. And, that's not yet the case everywhere. And there's this big patchwork of states with governors who are taking it more or less seriously. The people are following their local politicians' leads, and some of them, are only just starting to halt travel and crack down on large gatherings. So it's just been a patchwork throughout the country, I think.
Speaking of being in New York City, we talk about the reaction of New Yorkers, and particularly the governor and the mayor, to some of the Trump policies, to some of the apportionment of funds from the federal government. Is he playing politics with distributing those funds, playing preferences in giving those funds out. The New Yorkers seem to feel that we're being discriminated against. Jonathan, any sense of that?
Well, I think that's certainly a line of reporting that the Times is pursuing as we head into the weekend here, just to see how much the president, his team may or may not be playing favorites. But it is clear that even through this crisis, the president has taken the time to launch criticisms at governors with whom he has political disagreements. The relationship between, say, Governor Cuomo here in New York and the president has been interesting to watch as that involves, and they've sort of traded insults and they've traded compliments. And Trump has also gone after Governor Whitmer in Michigan and other Democrats, and of course he hasn't really launched those kinds of criticisms against Republican governors. So regardless of how things may or may not be playing out behind the scenes in terms of actual apportionment of equipment and protective gear and things like that, it is clear that on the surface level, the president continue, even in this crisis, he is going to continue to play favorites politically.
What about Andrew Cuomo? Reed, obviously in New York, at least, we're seeing a lot of praise for the governor for his leadership in this crisis. He's at his best in crises. Is any of that reflected around the country? And if it is there any political outcome from that? Or are we seeing this through New York lenses like we tend to do with local New York political figures, whether it was Rudy Giuliani or Mayor Bloomberg or anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're seeing across the country people suddenly seeing their governors on TV every day, seeing them position themselves as strong leaders. That what is happening with Cuomo is happening with governors around the country. Jay Inslee in Washington State, Andy Beshear in Kentucky, Mike DeWine in Ohio, Tony Evers in Wisconsin had a 76% approval rating in the same Marquette poll about his handling of the crisis in a state that's very bitterly divided along partisan lines. And so, yes, many governors who are presenting themselves as strong leaders during this public health crisis and taking difficult steps are finding their constituents, at least at the moment, receptive to what they're saying and approving of their actions.
Is there any talk about Cuomo in particular around the country, or are we just hearing this in New York?
Well, Cuomo has something that the rest of these governors don't, which is essentially a daily show on cable news to talk about it. And so there is more discussion. More people are seeing Cuomo because he's on CNN and MSNBC every day in the middle of the day, in the same way that the president is later in the evening. Governors in other states don't have access to that, and the cable networks don't take them live. And that's one, because Cuomo is in New York, and two, because New York is the epicenter of this crisis in the United States. And so Cuomo is, as we all know, very adept at creating a media persona for himself, and he's certainly doing a good job of that over the last couple of weeks.
Let me ask the three of you, is there any sense as how the debate over health care is going to play out between now and the election, and how that's going to be influenced by the coronavirus crisis? Obviously, there was going to be a debate about that under any circumstances, but how is that affected now?
Well, it's interesting. You're seeing, lots of people arguing everybody should get their coronavirus tests free, or everybody should get their treatment. Nobody should be denied treatment, which of course is a good argument for Medicare for all, and I think that that's one of the reasons that Sanders, thinks he still has some sort of role to play here, is that that's his signature issue. And this is a test case of what is happening in a healthcare system that is not a single payer system. And, obviously I don't think, I'm under no illusions that it's suddenly going to become easier to pass such a bill in the Congress that we have and in the country that we have. But it is a clear demonstration of some of the shortcomings of this healthcare system, and it might push some people to, at least start to consider alternatives.
Jonathan Reed, do you think it's going to change any minds in Congress in terms of shaping any new legislation on healthcare?
I mean, that seems unlikely given the makeup of the Congress and the fact that we are still 6-7 months out from an election. It just doesn't seem, there's certainly no appetite in the United States Senate for this. And keep in mind, even in the House, there isn't a majority to put together a Medicare for All type bill. I think any sort of significant changes in healthcare legislation is going to depend on the makeup of the Congress and who holds the White House next January.
And speaking of which, the makeup of the Congress, does the coronavirus crisis affect the congressional elections at all? We are saying that it clearly does the presidency, although we're not sure exactly how. But what about in terms of the House and the Senate?
I mean, we don't know, right? We don't know what the country is going to look like a month from now, let alone in November when people are going to start voting in September and October. But we just don't know what the scale of this crisis is going to be, how bad the damage is going to be, how much people are going to blame President Trump for it. If things get really bad and people assign blame to the president, that has the potential to take down a lot of Republicans in the Senate and the House with him. But we just don't know. And it'll take a while to figure that out. And frankly, it'll be very challenging to track that if reporters whose job it is to be determining that are stuck in their homes and not out in the country talking to people.
Well, the reporters are stuck in their homes. The candidates are stuck in their homes. The voters might be stuck in their homes if we wind up having to vote by mail or something like that. I'm certainly no expert on the Constitution, but I didn't realize the Constitution still says nothing about people, popular voters, voting for the president. It only talks about electors voting. So theoretically, a lot of this is up to the states, is it not?
Well, certainly the method in which people vote is up to the states, and we've seen that just over the last few weeks. Washington State had a primary a couple of weeks ago that went off without a hitch because it's a vote by mail state. Everyone in the state gets a ballot mailed to their house a couple of weeks before the election, and they have until election day to send it back. And the problem with instituting that nationwide is that you have certainly you have 50 states with electoral systems, and in many of these states, the elections are carried out by counties or townships. And so you have countless jurisdictions that would have to essentially on the fly change how they conduct their elections. Even in Wisconsin next week, there was a sort of an unprecedented interest in mail ballots. And one thing that we learned in covering this is that the size of the ballots that get mailed to people are different from the size of the ballots that people use on election day in Wisconsin. And so counting two sets of ballots on election night, especially in a state that's not used to such a big surge in mail voting, is going to be very challenging next week. And we can expect, especially in the urban areas, to see long delays in how the counting works.
If this continues well into the fall or resurges in the fall, is there a possibility the election would be delayed? And what would the consequences of that be? Jonathan, Joanna, what do you think?
Well, one thing is clear, which is that the president does not have the power to unilaterally delay the election. So much power is vested in the states. So it seems unlikely that there would just be some kind of fiat saying that we're not going to have the election on Tuesday in November. But yeah, I mean, it does raise a lot of questions about what the states are going to do. And as Reed was saying, it's very difficult to suddenly implement mail voting. A state like Washington makes it look easy, but the states that do their elections all by mail took years to make that transition. So as Reed was saying, it does seem very unlikely that everybody can suddenly do something like that for November.
How is all this affecting our coverage of the campaign? Joanna and Jonathan, you are handling that coverage. You're making the assignments. You're reviewing the coverage. how does it affect what we're doing? Obviously, this was going to be the big story of the year, and it's kind of been overtaken.
I mean, we have to be creative. It's bizarre because right when we went from having all of these candidates to just two Democratic candidates is basically when this happened. So there was already a big shift underway in the race, and then all of a sudden everybody is at home and nobody is going to campaign events. So it's definitely been a big shift. We have reporters watching, live streams. Joe Biden going on Jimmy Fallon and various shows trying to get his message out. You have to talk to voters on the phone, and you're not really going to see them at the same events. You need to be creative, and also, the virus is the main story right now, and so it's about thinking, how the virus is affecting electoral politics. Candidates without health insurance who are out campaigning, people who can't focus on voting because they've lost their jobs. How the fundraising is being affected. People not wanting to ask for donations given everything that's going on with the economy. So the virus is affecting all aspects, I think, of the election, just like it's affecting all aspects of life. And so you have to be nimble and figure out how to tell that story too.
Reed, in terms of that coverage and in terms of what the candidates do, what is their strategy? What does Joe Biden, what does Bernie Sanders do? Where is Elizabeth Warren? Is there a campaign going on, or has it in effect been suspended?
Well, no, there's not a campaign going on. What's happening is, Joe Biden is in his house. He does conference calls in the morning with public health officials. He does a couple of TV hits a day, and he spends a lot of time talking to donors, asking them to send him money. But there's nothing that anyone would recognize as a traditional campaign is happening now. Bernie Sanders is back in Vermont, and he, a couple nights a week does a 7 o'clock live stream with special guests. Sometimes there's a concert. Sometimes it's talking about the coronavirus crisis. But there's nothing that anyone would say this is what a campaign looks like.
So we said at the beginning that the coronavirus will determine whether Trump will be a one-term president. Anyone want to guess as to which way it will determine it?
No, I don't want to guess.
No comment.
No, I don't blame you. Let me ask one last question, if I might. Infrastructure, a word I hate to use. Let's talk about public works instead. Is there any likelihood that given the low interest rates, there may actually be legislation that'll get that moving?
I mean, maybe,
Perhaps, but yeah.
No one ever lost money betting against the Congress doing something.
So that's a no.
You don't know, right? I mean, they got together very quickly to put together the $2 trillion stimulus package, and so something could happen if conditions get much worse. The Congress could get back together and try to react to that. But at the moment, I'm in Washington, and almost all of them have left town, and we're in a situation where you could see the airlines shutting down. And so for a lot of these members, it could be extremely difficult to get back to Washington, if conditions in the country change.
So what does Congress do next to either jumpstart the economy or keep it from collapsing entirely? Jonathan and Joanna, is there anything on that agenda that would actually work? You look at the unemployment claims at record numbers. You look at businesses shuttered all over the country, small businesses, major corporations, department stores. What's left for Congress to do? What's left for the Fed to do?
Well, first they have to make sure that these stimulus checks actually go out. The $1,200 checks to citizens. Beyond that, there does seem to be sort of a more open question as to whether, I think the checks are sort of considered maybe the phase 3 of the economic relief legislation, and there seems to be more of an open question as to whether there will be a phase 4. But part of this also depends on the execution. I mean, this money really needs to get into the hands of so many Americans. Obviously this week we saw yet another record unemployment figures come out. So, more than 6 million people filing for unemployment in the last week. So not only do they have to think forward, but there's also this big question of the execution now.
And of course, not everyone is going to get that check, but even for those who do, is $1,200 going to do it?
I mean,
That's yeah.
it's not an ideal amount of money. I would argue. It's better than nothing, but people are, can't afford to eat right now. I mean, this is just, it's a disaster, and beyond individual people. I mean, restaurant industries, the arts, journalism organizations. It's so many industries are just being impacted by this, and it's just going to be very lasting, I think.
Reed, Jonathan, Joanna, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Sam Roberts for the New York Times and CUNY TV.